There's something about the sound of a D-loop forming just right, and today's guest has spent a lifetime chasing that moment. From backyard practice sessions to guiding anglers through steelhead country, his approach to casting isn't about hype or gear, it's about feel, timing, and simplicity. In today's episode, we break down the 4 steps to clean up your Spey cast, what's some common issues and struggles people have and how to fix those, and what to do when your cast or your confidence falls apart on the water. This is the Wet Fly Swimming Podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. Jeff Putnam shares his story and the evolution of Spey lines and rods today. We're going to get into trout, steelhead. We're going to get in single hand. We're going to find out how Jeff fine-tunes anglers that he's teaching in his schools, where you can connect to some online resources, and what he's got going this coming year. We're going to talk the Rogue River. We're going to talk Northern California. We're going to be all over the country, and it's going to be a great one. Whether you're chasing trout with a 3-weight Spey rod or swinging for winter steelhead, Jeff has the tips that'll make your cast better this year. All right, here we go. Jeff Putnam. You can find him at jpflyfishing.com. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing great, Dave. Thank you very much for inviting me to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for coming on here. This is going to be an exciting one. We always love talking Spey, two-handed casting, steelhead, trout, whatever. We've just come back. I just came back from Alaska, had a month up there on a couple of different trips, and we fished my first time fishing for king salmon on the swing. And we were using kind of some of the heavier stuff. So I'm really excited about this because, I think everybody has challenges. I had my challenges on that trip, and, shout out to Justin. He was up there. And, but yeah, I think that there's little things that we could all do better. And I know that's something I will talk about today. You have a fly fishing school, so you have been doing this for a long time. We're going to help some people learn maybe how to become better fly casters. But before we get into all that, take us back real quick on the whole thing. Have you been doing this a while? When did you first get into fly fishing?
Yeah, so I've been addicted to fly fishing ever since I was a little kid. I grew up in Sacramento, California, and every opportunity I could pick up a fly rod, which started when I was about 10, 11 years old. I actually started tying flies before I started fly casting. I would use those on a spinning rod with a little bubble and kind of did my thing around, the Truckee River, South Fork of the American, the Sierras and all that. And then one day I saw a gentleman fishing on the Truckee River with a fly rod, which I had seen on TV on American Sportsman with Kurt Gowdy. So I was enamored by what this guy was doing, watching this beautiful fly line going back and forth. And he was catching trout on the surface. I sat on the bank. I watched him. He turns around and kind of describes kind of what he's doing. And I was hooked from that second just by watching this gentleman. From there, I would cast in my swimming pool every day in my backyard, pretending I was like you in Alaska or pretending I was someplace. That's all I wanted to do. So started at a very early age and started fishing the Sacramento area. I tell you what kind of happened was when I started driving. I started cutting school a few times, right? Because the salmon and steelhead were coming in. So I would head out to the river, I'd catch my fish, and I'd report it to the local fly shops. Hey, I was here, I caught some fish there, and one thing led to another. And so they would send people to me on the river. Most of it was through Keeney's Fly Shop. I kind of grew up in that store. I got a job with Bill Keeney, the owner, when I was about 17 years old, and started guiding through the shop, started teaching lessons, really focused on fly casting. And I think it was 1992 or 93, I got my certification for single-handed casting. And once I got that certification, and that was early in the program, I started developing a real big following. And the goal for me was to try to teach fly casting and make it as easy as possible. So I did that in California for several years. In the summertime, I would go out and guide in Colorado. I would go to Montana and guide, back to Colorado for a few years. And then back to Sacramento. I've worked in the fly fishing industry. I've pretty much done everything from, as I mentioned, working in fly shops to working in lodges, working with all the big equipment manufacturers, helping them, design fly rods and fly lines. So, Dave, I've been addicted since I've been a child. This is all I know how to do.
That's awesome. So you're roughly, I'm just kind of putting the time frame, so like 50 years or so. So like mid 70s, is that kind of when you were first learning about it as a kid?
So I'm 53 right now, and I was around 10, 11. So right around, 86, 87-ish, right in there.
Okay.
I think I remember going to Yellowstone Park with my family when it was 1985. It was before the big fires they had. So yeah, I've been fortunate enough to meet a lot of good people in the industry. A gentleman by the name of Bob Quigley, I was introduced to as a kid through my math teacher in 7th grade, who turned out to be a big fly fisherman. I was doing really poor in his class.
Yep.
And he calls my mom, and parents go in, and he's like, "Hey, Jeff, you got to focus. What are you doing in my class? Because you're not paying attention, but I see your math book is open." And I said, "Well, in my math book, I have a Fly Fisherman magazine. And I'm reading about how to catch fish on Hat Creek in Spring Creek conditions," right? And turns out, he said, "Well, I fly fish. And if you get a B or better on the next test, I'll take you fishing." Long story short, him and I fished for probably about 7, 8 years together all over the West Coast. He
Oh,
became
wow.
one of my best mentors in the world.
That's cool.
That's Richard Chin is his name. So wonderful person.
Oh yeah, Richard Chin. Okay, that's amazing. Yeah, I had a little bit of that back in high school as well. We had some teachers that were in fly fishing and had a connection there. It's pretty awesome how that comes together.
How cool.
So let's go back. So Sacramento, sounds like you're very familiar with that area. What is the Sacramento? Because you hear a lot about it. I haven't fished it yet, but you hear about like the fishing's still good down there. Did you see many changes in, I'm guessing, were you fishing steelhead down there in that area as well?
Yeah, actually, I caught my first steelhead when I was 12 years old on a swung fly. I was fishing with my math teacher. We were out on the American River, and it was interesting and I call back in the day, which is early to mid 80s, there was a bigger population of fish in the river year round, more trout that maybe possibly hadn't migrated yet. There was a population of steelhead and a big population of king salmon, also striped bass. So we had the best of the best, right, literally running right through town. And I saw the change in the fishing probably around mid to late 90s. And who knows what that is? Obviously, water environment, fishing conditions in the ocean, all of that thing attributes to the quality of fishing. But I really kind of saw a downturn on it. And I kind of stepped back and looking at the different anadromous fish runs on the entire West Coast, is kind of everything started to drop, about that time. So
yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was the whole, again, it probably goes back to the ocean conditions is a big part of it, because the early 90s and into the mid 90s was when you saw these changes ocean conditions probably, and then ESA listings, right? A lot of the fish that changed down there. Did you also see a bump after that? Did you see kind of in the mid 2000s and later where the runs came back?
Yeah, absolutely. The numbers came back around 2008, 9, 10, 11. Fishing got pretty darn good on the American River. And then it just kind of went to a plateau and then started dropping off a little bit more. But here's the reality. It's kind of interesting. I'm still in contact with people that fish on the American River in Sacramento, and a couple of gentlemen, they fish it at least 3 times a week. They're showing me steelhead. They're showing me striped bass. They're showing me everything. They're still catching them, but it's just a matter of putting in the time to get those fish. You know what I mean? But it's fishing in the Sacramento area. It's phenomenal. It's right in town. It's hard to beat.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, cool. So, and you're not too far away. I'm guessing, you got the road really close, but even all the other rivers of the Columbia and up in Washington, it's all tracking similarly on the same thing. So, and is the American River, that's the cool thing about where you're at or down there in Northern California, is that's kind of where, we've had John Shuey on. He's talked about the history of fly fishing, and steelhead fishing kind of began down there in that area. Do you know a little bit about the history? Do you know the rivers? The American is a pretty famous river, right?
Yeah, it is. And it runs right through town. It's a valley river, so it's not directly connected to the ocean. But when you talk about the guys that have been doing this back in the 60s and 70s, when they were on the Eel, the Smiths, some of them would even come up into Southern Oregon and fish the Chetco and the Gualala River, the Russian River. I was lucky enough to fish those when they were still pretty good. But boy, they have all changed tremendously, not being the same. But the Rogue River here, what's really cool about it is I can go out there pretty much any month of the year, with the exception of maybe April and May. That gets a little slow. But every other month you have an opportunity of catching a steelhead in this river. And Dave, one of the big things that I've noticed about is Southern Oregon with the Rogue River specifically, because it's not really used for agriculture like the American River in Sacramento, in the Valley rivers, including the Yuba, the Feather. That's all agriculture. So the demand of water is based on farming for the most part. Where here, they put the fish first. Every time I talk to somebody, it's about the fish. So it's a wonderful thing to experience how they really want to protect the fishery up here. So I'm very happy to be part of that as well.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, the Rogue is awesome. I'm actually in the process of reading a book right now. It's about Woolridge, so the Woolridges
there you go.
we were up at Togiak River Lodge, and they use all Woolridge boats. And
Exactly.
and we were sitting there at the lodge, and I was like, oh, I'll take a look at this book because I love the history, and they wrote a book about the whole family, but they basically grew up on the Rogue back in the turn of the century.
Absolutely.
And it's really interesting, just hearing about I'm sure the stuff you see all the time, and the stories and the fishing. And Woolridge was a big, he was addicted to water and the fish and stuff. So it's cool. Do you see, now, are you in Grants Pass, or what town are you in?
I'm actually in the town of Rogue River.
And where's Rogue River? Where's that? Is that
in between Grants Pass and Medford?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Rogue River. Gotcha. Yeah. So you're right there, kind of in the upper. So you're kind of right in the prime. You can go upriver or downriver,
Yes.
right into the wild and scenic.
Exactly right. Well said.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, what do you like as far as steelhead? Do we're going to talk two-handed a little bit here today? Is the setup you use on the Rogue for, say, steelhead in the upper river similar to what you might use on the American?
Yeah, very similar. The Rogue River kind of has a special size of fish where they fall kind of between the 3 to 6 pound range, and that's our summer and fall run. It's not uncommon to get fish up to 10 pounds or maybe over, where the American River, their runs down there primarily focus around the winter run. They don't have as good of a summer run as we do up here. So the winter run fish in the Valley rivers, I would say maybe a 6 or a 7 weight if you had one rod to do everything. But up here on the Rogue with the smaller size of fish, I'm usually throwing a 5 weight, 12 foot long, or up to a 6 weight, maybe a 12.5 foot. So a little bit larger, a little bit lighter of a rod up here on the Rogue.
Gotcha. So 12 foot, and then down on the sack and there, or the American, you might be using a 12.5 or 13 foot or longer.
Correct. Well said.
Yeah. Good. Okay.
Yeah.
And is it still, we found you've been in this because you started in the 90s, right? When things kind of started beginning, really getting going. But as far as the Skagit lines, Scandi lines, you got all this stuff, long belly, short belly. Have you done it all and then seen the transition from kind of long to short and all that?
Yeah, absolutely. When I first started, there was no Skagit heads. There was, you had Ed Ward, Mike McCune, and Scott O'Donnell. They were kind of up in the Pacific Northwest, Deck Hogan included. And those guys were doing the Skagit thing way back in the day. In my neck of the woods, it was long bellies, the Rio Wind Cutter. Even before the Rio Wind Cutter, we were using the Accelerator, which we're talking way back in the day.
What was the Accelerator? Was the Accelerator who made that line?
The Accelerator was one of the worst designed Spey lines on the planet because it had a taper that dropped down to a thin taper and then it got thick again. So trying to cast that was nearly impossible. So they kind of really focused on the Wind Cutter.
Okay. So that was an early Rio line.
That is correct.
Yeah.
And Airflow had been doing some stuff with the Delta taper, and Deck Hogan really made that popular. Simon Gosworth kind of came out with Rio, and that's where the Wind Cutter kind of really was developed. But there was no short heads for the first 4 or 5 years. So I learned on longer heads.
Yeah.
And then I started seeing how they were actually casting Scandinavia heads, shorter heads in, parts of Norway and Europe. So I learned the underhanded Scandinavian technique. And then Ed Ward, his name started getting bigger with the Skagit. So I learned Ed Ward's Skagit techniques. I basically learned everything. And what's interesting now is, as an instructor, after learning all those methods, my goal was to, again, try to simplify the sport, find the commonality. Now I teach it where there's 4 steps to spey casting, 4 simple steps. And once you learn this technique, you can cast any fly line you want to cast, so you don't have to change your style. You just change the stroke length based upon the length of the head you're using.
Let DeMark Lodge give you the Montana fly fishing experience you deserve. The gin clear waters of the Missouri River offer a world-class experience with one of the finest rainbow trout and brown trout fisheries in the world. Whether you're a seasoned angler or new to the sport, their family of guides will tailor a trip just for you. You can head over to ondemarklodge.com to fish one of the great trout streams in the country. When it comes to high-quality flies that truly elevate your fly fishing game, Drifthook.com is the trusted source you need. I've been using Drifthook's expertly selected flies for a while now, and they never disappoint. Plus, they stand behind their products with a money-back guarantee. Are you ready to upgrade your fly box? Head over to drifthook.com today and use the code SWING at checkout to get 15% off your first order. That's Drifthook, Drifthook.com. Don't miss out. So yeah, let's jump into that, because I know 4 steps. I'm guessing what they might be, but let's talk about that, because I think that everybody has could use some help, right, on their cast. But
absolutely,
how do you break that? Let's just take it. Say we're, I guess, coming into your school, we can talk more about how that looks. But yeah, give us the 4 steps first.
You bet. So basically, there's step 1 is the start. When you're starting, you want a straight fly line with absolutely no slack. The head length is outside of the rod tip with a little bit of running line, maybe 4 or 5 inches out of the rod tip as well. Low rod tip, no slack. That's the most important thing on step number 1. And depending on what cast you're doing, okay, now we start talking into about the different spey casts, which is the sustained anchor casts or a touch and go. Sustained anchor casts are easier to start off with. That would be like a snap tee or a double spey.
Yep.
Or there are the touch and goes, which is the single spey or the snake roll. And then there's several other casts in each of those categories, but we break them down with those 2. So on a sustained anchor cast, step 1, let's say if you're doing the snap tee, it would be the snap or the repositioning of the fly line. So a lot of people say, oh, you draw basically a big C shape. You bring the rod tip back to the water. That puts the fly line in position so then you can execute the next 3 steps, which after the snap, step number 2 would be acknowledging your target by pointing the rod tip to where you want to cast towards, which is usually the far bank out into the river. And then step number 3 is bringing the rod tip back on a flat, straight plane with a little bit of a lifting curve at the end of it. That step number 3 is by far the most difficult to execute and requires the most attention. Once your D-loop is formed and your anchor point is on the water after step 3, your step 4 is simply your forward stroke. Okay, so you take all 4 steps, and then what I try to do is I try to break each one of those steps down so you can practice them separately without having to thinking about the other 3 steps involved. So that's kind of my method. And on my YouTube channel, JP Fly Fishing Schools, I have a brand new video that breaks that down. So
perfect.
Yeah, easy to follow.
Okay. Awesome. Well, yeah, we'll put that in the show notes so people can take a look at that after this episode.
Super.
This is awesome. So I love the simplicity. Break it down. And obviously, there's lots of more steps and things in the middle there. Maybe talk about your school. Do you do these? Is it online? Is it all in person? How do you do the schools?
Yeah, great question. So a lot of people will actually come up to the Rogue River, where I teach 7 days a week, year-round fly fishing, fly casting. Some of the lessons I do are also single-handed spey. So we want to remember that spey casting is a technique, whether you're using a single-handed rod or a 2-handed rod. So I teach that as well. And then I also travel back down to Sacramento twice a year. I also travel down to Redding. And then whoever wants me to come and put on a school through different fly shops or fly fishing clubs, I'm always available for that as well.
Cool. Well, this is awesome. Yeah, maybe down the line we could talk more about putting something like this together. I think that, we're actually doing kind of a fly casting challenge. We're working on it now, trying to get some, and this might be a good chance to talk more about it, but just trying to help people, increase their skills a little bit. Like I said at the start, I had a day on that Alaska trip where, it struggled. I was probably tired. I broke a big fish off.
Oh,
And I've been talking about this a little bit because I think everybody has these moments, but we had Floyd was our guide that day, and he just, he's this really unique type of guide where he's intense.
Yeah.
And he was trying to get me to put this together, and it just didn't happen. And, and the next day he came up and he said, "Hey man, you have a good cast. You just got to stick with it. Everybody has these days." And I was like, all right. And I got out the next day and it landed one of the best fish of my life, pretty much.
How cool.
And it came back to me. So the casting came back. But
yeah,
what do you tell somebody when they're out there struggling, they're having that day? What does somebody do with their cast? I mean, obviously it depends on what type of caster, but what would be the advice if you were sitting there for that person?
Absolutely. The number one issue that I commonly see all the time is people blowing their anchor. Okay. So after step 3, that anchor point and D-loop do not want to be established on the water. It wants to lift up in the air. And you could hear that when you cast, because you'll usually hear like a whooshing sound, right, of an unstable anchor on the water. So addressing step number 3 is the most important part of the Spey cast. And I recommend focusing on a switch cast to isolate step number 3. And that's simply usually by looking up at your rod tip as you form your D-loop and anchor point on what people could call the back cast, right? Yeah. Usually back cast is associated with overhead casting, right. But just for simplicity, the Spey cast, when you set your D-loop and anchor point on the water, we'll just call it the back cast during this little audio presentation here. So we get the back cast by looking up and focusing on your rod tip. If you do that, your arms, hands, your body will actually follow exactly what your brain is telling it to do by just simply looking at your rod tip. So I tell people when you're casting, put your opposite foot forward, face your target. So I'm a right-handed caster. I'm going to put my left foot in front of my right foot. And that gives me the opportunity to look up and watch the rod tip path. It's all about that path, especially on step 3. Yeah. And so practice just a couple switch casts, look at your rod tip. When you feel comfortable, go right back to whatever cast you were doing. And you'll always notice that step 3, the switch cast path is in every single Spey cast you ever do.
Yeah. And what is the switch cast?
Yeah. So a switch cast is pretty much a practice cast. It does not switch directions. So the point that you're picking it up, the direction you're picking it up in, is exactly where you're going to cast towards. And by eliminating or taking out the variable of direction change, that's one less thing to think about. Now our attention could be focused more on the placement of the anchor point, the shape of the D-loop, and the rod tip path, your timing and acceleration and all the other stuff that goes into it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So forget about the fishing for a second where you're going to hook that fish. Just focus on the cast and left foot forward, which helps you look back at your cast. And that's a good advice because now you can see the rod tip and then you can also see the D-loop, right, as it comes back.
Exactly, Dave. And I tell people, you are your best teacher by just simply watching and observing everything that's going on. So true.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, good. So that's an awesome tip right there. Well, let's take it to your class a little bit because the school sounds great. I think that if people can get on the water with you, obviously that would be the best, but we're going to talk about it here. What is that? Let's see, talk about the school. When people come in, is this a daily or is this like a multi-day? How does that look?
Yeah. So I do teach group lessons that are usually a half a day. I try to take 4 people. I want to give everybody a lot of attention, a lot of time. And in about 4 hours, I'm going to give everybody in that group enough information to where they're going to want to stop and go practice on their own over possibly, let's say, a 2-week period. If you can get out 3 times a week for 30, 40 minutes, it's going to make a huge difference. You're going to hit the plateau where you go, hey, I want distance. I want tighter loops, and I want to use even less effort to do this. So then I say, well, come back for maybe a 1 to 2 hour tune-up lesson. Okay. Usually after that, people are often running on their own. Yeah. If they don't fish for a while, they may come back to me prior to going on a trip. I do a lot of tune-up trips. I've got a gentleman I'm working right now. He's headed up to the Skeena River in about 2 weeks.
Oh, nice. Right?
So, and I'm hearing some pretty good fish numbers up there this year.
Where's he going? Where's he going on the Skeena?
He's going to go on the lower Skeena, down by where the Kalem comes into it. I don't know if you're familiar with that, right in the town of Terrace.
Oh, by
right in
Terre. Oh, yeah,
Terrace.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
we do our steelhead. Actually, we've got a group going up there. I won't be up there this year, but we're going up to Brian Niska's Ski and Spey
Oh,
Lodge.
perfect. There you go.
So we're
Beautiful.
going to be, yeah, and so I know that lower river, which is really cool. You get fish there
Right.
that are migrating through the river.
Absolutely. You can catch those sustet strain fish, which are the big monsters. One of my clients landed a fish 42 inches about 5-6 years ago down in the lower. And the guide said, oh, this is probably that big sustet genetic fish. Who knows where it was going to, but it's exciting. I love fishing on that lower section.
Yeah, that's cool. So you're tuning this. So you got a guy who's got to get tuned up for maybe the fish of a lifetime. And so what does the tune up look like? You just kind of watch his cast and give him some pointers?
So basically everybody comes with, hey, Jeff, my casting is inconsistent. And I try to kind of specifically target, well, do you not like the forward stroke? Are you not getting enough distance? Are you hearing the line ripping off the water? But reality is I watch them for about 1 minute and it just falls into place exactly what we need to do. And I just touch base on the parts of the cast that need to be fixed. I'm not trying to, reinvent their casting style or casting stroke, but just target specific things that will help them. And usually it always comes down to I'm blowing my anchor and they're unfamiliar with how to keep the rod tip parallel to the water surface without gaining elevation on step 3. So I gave a lot away right there. If you don't want to hire me for less, just watch your rod tip on step number 3. But that pretty much sums up what the most of that lesson's going to be about. And then a lot of people, Dave, don't have an understanding of how powerful their bottom hand is when they're casting Spey. So I see that top hand dominant pushing, they'll say, oh, my shoulder's getting a little tired. Well, let's say this, you've got a 12 to 13 foot rod in your hand, your shoulder should never be tired. That's a long amplifier. You've got the ability to use very little motion and movement, but the key is focusing on the bottom hand being the engine of the cast. That's where your power comes from, not the top hand.
Yeah, bottom hand. That's it. That was my struggle early on and still is sometimes, but yeah, the bottom hand is key. So
absolutely. And Dave, just to point this out too, on my website under my Space Shop, if people go in there, you can actually go online and see my video analysis.
Oh, really?
Basically, people will send me a video of themselves, and I say, send me a 2-minute video. 1 minute of casting from a side view, the second minute casting straight at the camera. And all I need is a couple minutes of the video. I will analyze it, and then I will actually respond with a video showing the correct way to cast.
Oh, cool.
And that's been very, very popular. So you can do that at any time and from anywhere in the world too.
You can. And so where is that I'm on your website. So where do you go?
Yeah. Oh, it should be under, let's see, is it my Fly Shop that's there?
Oh yeah. Fly Shop.
And then if you scroll down, you'll see video analysis. There you go, right there.
Yeah. Video analysis. This is great. Yeah. I love this. You got it. Okay. Perfect. And looking at this and then good. So you can just submit that. That's awesome. And we've been working with, we've had some episodes where we've talked about, we had Marty and Caitlin, and they were talking more about single hand, but you will do this for 2-hand and both 2-hand and single.
Absolutely. Everything.
Yeah.
You bet.
Gotcha. And you got a little form here where people can submit. This is perfect. Okay. Great to hear. So we have that resource for sure. We will be working on that as well. What is, as you switch over to, you've got 2-handed and then you go to single-handed or maybe trout. When you think trout Spey, or most people, do you think they're thinking double-handed trout Spey or single-handed or both?
I think two-handed.
Yeah.
Two-handed, and generally we're dropping the rod size down into 2, 3, 4, or a 5 weight. And I would say the 5 weight can be a little large for trout. I worked as an advisor with Rio Fly Lines and Farbank Company, which is also Reddington and Sage. Simon Gosworth, this is probably around 2010. We were doing a show together in California. And he said to me, he goes, hey, what are you using for trout? And I said, I really like the 4 weight. And he goes, man, I'll tell you, try to drop down to a 3. The technology, Jeff, in the last few years, has come to a whole new point where we don't need heavy rods anymore. So I picked up a 3 weight under his advice. And I'll tell you, for just trout only, that let's say from 12 to 22 inches, a 3 weight is the magic number, in my opinion. If you want to cast further or cast in the wind or throw a larger fly, You might go to a 4-weight, but boy, a 3-weight really preserves the fight of a small trout. And that's typical. It's nice to go get 20-inch trout if you can, but we're catching a lot of 13, 14, 15-inch, right? And so a 3-weight is, I think, perfect for that. Some people will ask me, they'll go, hey, what do you think about a 2-weight? Well, if you have perfect conditions, if you need a really delicate presentation, kind of on a spring creek, you might be swinging a small soft tackle with no wind. I think that's appropriate. But a 3-weight, if you just got one trout rod, it's a great way to go.
3-weight is all around. So that, and is it kind of the 2-weight? So a 3-weight would be like a 5-weight single hand rod.
Exactly.
Or just add 2.
That's right. Well said.
Yeah. So that makes sense. So you got your typical, the 9-foot 5-weight is your all around most common, trout rod or whatever. But then you got the 6-weight might be better for wind, or maybe the 4-weight is better if you just need that subtle presentation. So same thing here.
Yep. Well said. Well said. And just to add a little bit to that, I would say that looking for those rods in terms of the technique, because everybody says, oh, 2-handed Spey, you're swinging. Well, not necessarily. You can actually dead drift a indicator split shot system or a dry fly. You can do that with it as well. But it's better designed when you're swinging or stripping a streamer back to you. But yeah, you can definitely do some dry fly dead drifting as well with the 2-handed rods.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. Well, let's get back into the school. So we're in there for a 4-hour. So in that 4-hour session, describe that. How does that look if somebody's in person? Is it always the same process when you go through that?
It pretty much is. When I start off the class, I want to start everybody off with something they're familiar with. So generally we'll start with roll casting. And everybody's, if you've been single-handed casting, you know what a roll cast is. But now it's using the bottom hand, which is the big hurdle for somebody that's brand new starting off. So we basically roll cast for a little bit, and then I start working on formation of the D-loop and anchor point, and really focus on the switch cast as the teaching technique for that. And then we start to add a little bit of direction change. By the end of those 4 hours, I want everybody in the class to feel comfortable with at least one cast. And I love starting off the snap tee because it's an easier cast. You can slow down. You can really analyze everything. And at the end of the class, we may touch on the double Spey from the opposite side of the river. But the way I'm teaching it is the only step that changes out of the 4 steps is step number 1. So I can teach step number 1 as a snap for a snap tee. Step number 1 for a double Spey could be the flop. Step number 1 could even be like a parry poke setup.
Yep.
But once you do that, it's always now pointing to your target on the far bank. Step number 2, then followed by step number 3, which is forming your D-loop and anchor point, and executing step number 4, your forward stroke. So when people take this class, they go, oh, this is actually easy to remember. I only have to change step 1 depending on what side of the river I'm on. Right. So I make it real simple. And then we do a little recap at the end. I usually hand out a cheat sheet with all the diagrams and all the information that we went over. And people usually after that are off and running to the races. So it's exciting to see, though, how somebody can be intimidated at first, but by the end, their confidence is up and they might be even shooting some fly line at the end of that 4-hour lesson. Right. Exactly. That's a good day for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. How often do you get people that are brand new to fly fishing? Do you recommend is starting with Spey, 2-handed Spey okay, or should they start with, did you ever get that? Somebody that hasn't even cast a single hand rod?
Absolutely. Just the other day, I had a gentleman who wants to get into steelhead fishing, who's never picked up a single-handed rod before. Those people are actually easier to teach than somebody that has experience with a single-handed rod.
Yep.
So, I like it when they're fresh and brand new, but the reality is most people have been single-handed casting prior to picking up a 2-handed rod.
Yeah, that's right. That's the common. Okay. And what about a few of the casts? So I think you mentioned earlier that the touch and go versus say the snap tee and stuff.
Yeah.
If somebody isn't really good with the snake roll, could you describe a little bit about how to do some of those touch and go casts?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at a switch cast is basically a single Spey that does not change directions. So when I'm teaching my method, they're going to learn how to switch cast, and it's very easy. to go from a switch cast, non-changing directions to changing 20 to 45, 60, 70 degrees. And now it becomes a touch and go single spey. Reality is single spey has been one of the most challenging casts for people to execute. It's timing sensitive. The anchor points are a little bit harder to establish on the water, but because I'm teaching the switch cast, it's my basic beginning cast, it's very easy to transition into that touch and go. The other one is a snake roll, and people go, oh man, snake rolls are difficult. And I say this to them, I say, it's a touch and go. It has the same 4 steps, except they're continuous. You don't snap and then point to the target. You basically start your rod tip low on the water. And if you're a right-handed caster, you're going to be on river right to use this over your dominant shoulder. So imagine we're in a river and we're looking downstream at our fly line hanging out in the current. I look at the rod tip and I'm going to take that fly line and I'm going to make a direction change of approximately 45 degrees to 90 degrees. Okay. As I start the rod tip low on the surface of the water with no slack, like I do every step 1, I start the rod tip and I trace a clock, and I'm going counterclockwise from 6 o'clock at the water surface. I follow the curvature of the clock back to 3, up to 12 noon, over the top to 9. Then I cut the clock in half back to 3.
Oh, right.
Right? When I cut the clock in half back to 3, the rod tip stays above the top of my head about 3 or 4 feet. That one continual motion, and it looks like a lowercase letter E backwards. Okay, that's all we're tracing.
Yeah.
And then you're going to hang out at your rod tip is going to be around the 2 o'clock position, like it finishes every step 3 in. That's always the same.
Yep.
At that moment, you're waiting for the fly line to fall to the water surface to create the anchor point and form the D-loop. When that fly line is 1 inch from touching the water surface, it's time to execute step 4, your forward stroke. So there's the simple breakdown of
cool.
a snake roll. And I'll tell you, the snake roll for me is one of the most important casts that people can learn when they're fishing 2-handed rods, because you can apply that to your single-handed rod, and now you can change direction when you're trout fishing without one single false cast. And we know, right, when you're false casting, your fly's in the air, it's not on the water. So it's kind of wasted time. I want to do a snake roll, immediately get the fly back into the water where the fish can see it. So I've noticed that since I started spey casting way back in the day, my hook rate has gone up because I'm covering more water and showing my fly to new fish more throughout the day.
That's awesome. Yeah. So that's the thing. So the snake roll versus, say, the advantage of the snake roll is that you're fishing more. Is that the main thing that you're able to get out there? Because you could do another cast, you could do whatever, a snap tee or a different cast there. What would be this? Why is the snake roll worthwhile?
Yeah, that's it. Is because it eliminates the step 1 of the snap in setting up the fly line. Right. Yep. So you're basically going from at the end of your swing at the hang down, you're instantly picking it up, dropping your anchor point, that touch and go goes right back out to the water.
Yeah.
So it's so much more efficient. And I really recommend when people are doing that snake roll, try it over your opposite shoulder so that when you're fishing trout, you can be on either side of the river. You can cast in reverse over your opposite shoulder or on your dominant side. Really important cast.
So this is and you could do this for single hand spey too for trout.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where it really shines. And so people, they'll ask me, hey, why do you take a single handed rod out for trout, Jeff? Why aren't you using spey all the time? I will say this, Dave, I'm a dry fly fanatic.
Yeah.
And I love head hunting. And for me, if I could take a 4-weight 9-foot with a 12-foot leader, 5X, and small little Spring Creek style flies, that for me is the peak of fly fishing. Besides swinging up a steelhead, but I enjoy that so much. So when I go to, let's say, Hat Creek or even the McLeod or whatever river it is, I'm usually going to take my two-handed trout spey and then also my 9-foot 4-weight trout rod. And if I know that there's a big hatch, I'll target heads with my single-handed rod because it's more accurate than a two-handed rod. But if the fish aren't up on top, no problem. I'll break my spey rod out and I'll start swinging and searching and covering a lot of water to find the fish.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, and the McLeod's another one of those rivers. We heard Alex in our group. He was talking about that. He was up there in Alaska as well, and he had fished McLeod for trout.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that area, there's some amazing famous rivers. Those names you hear about, and you have the trout spey works well up there. So that's
absolutely, absolutely.
Let's take a break and check in with Jackson Hole Fly Company right now. The right gear can turn a good day on the water into an unforgettable one. Jackson Hole Fly Company's combo kits are built to match the rhythm of the river, giving you everything you need in one simple package. Each kit pairs a perfectly matched rod and reel with essential accessories, ready to fish right out of the box. From the beginner-friendly Crystal Creek to the high-performance Flat Creek, there's a setup for every angler. And don't forget about their packs and slings. I've been loving my Jackson Hole sling pack for a number of years now. The perfect size to fit all your gear, but not too heavy and not too big to drag you down. Check out their slings and rods and much more at jacksonholeflycompany.com. And you can support this podcast by checking in with Jackson Hole Fly Company today. So you have the trout spey. What about lines? Because you think of, we talked about, the evolution of lines is made with the Skagit, especially has made spey, two-hand spey so much easier for people to get into. What is the line if you're fishing for like single-hand spey for trout? Do you need a special line or can you just use your regular line?
Well, I'll tell you what, Rio was nice enough to develop their single-handed trout spey, which is basically a 34-foot head with a very nice taper where the mass of the taper is at the rear of the head. So as the taper goes out, it continually gets smaller and smaller. That is the best taper for spey casting with a single-handed rod, which would be similar to like a double taper, right? Mm-hmm. Except we're just extending and pulling that front taper out longer over a 34-foot range, right?
Yeah.
So being that the mass is in the back of the head, it allows the rod to load when you're roll casting, and you want the mass of the fly line close to the rod tip, just outside of it when you're spey casting. So using like a Rio Gold with kind of a weight forward taper, it's a little bit more difficult. It's actually harder to throw and form a tighter loop just because the mass of the fly line is out in the front of the taper and it wants to fall out when the fly line's turning over. So yeah, Rio's single-handed spey line is by far my favorite single-handed spey casting line, but it also overhead casts incredibly well.
No, it does.
Yeah,
nice.
I can't say enough about that. And what's important for two-handed trout spey is, and I'm a fan of what Rio's doing, but you can get these fly lines from various manufacturers.
Yeah.
I recommend when you're using trout spey that your fly line, the head is integrated into the running line, because we're doing so much stripping for the presentation. You don't want the loop-to-loop connection of the head and running line bumping through the guides as you strip it in, right? So that's where I'm really focused on. I love the integrated heads, and I think Rio, in their trout spey models, they have one of the most versatile tapers for kind of medium to small flies. If you want to throw something a little heavier, you can get an integrated Skagit head, for trout, which that's also a nice line to throw if you're going to be stripping in. And then some people go, I'm just going to put on a thin diameter running line, maybe around 25 thousandths, and I'm just going to put on a separate head. And a lot of those people might not strip the fly in that close, and that's okay too. But reality is, I really love the integrated lines from Rio when you're using two-handed trout spey.
Yeah. And what was the name of that one if they're going to pick that up for the two-handed trout spey?
Yeah, that's called trout spey.
Yeah, just trout spey.
Yeah,
okay,
you got it.
So they got the line. Okay, good. So that's a good place we can go to check some of that out. And then what about rods? It sounds like, there's lots of great rods out there. So many brands have great rods. Do you have one? Do you have one you love to use, or do you have a few?
My favorite is on my website. So I'm working locally with a rod manufacturer that actually just moved from Medford over to Bend. And it was Bob Miser,
Oh yeah,
who's been around since day one.
sure.
He kind of invented the term switch rod back in the 90s.
Yep.
So I've been working with his engineer and working on my own series of two-handed rods that I offer through my website. And basically what we're looking at is a rod that is very sensitive, very light, that has soul to it.
Yeah.
I'm not into the telephone poles, the broomsticks that don't have a lot of feedback and feel to them. And when I put lighter rods that my clients can feel the rod bend, they're connected to it. So it helps with their timing. It helps acceleration issues. It really helps them become a better spey caster much quicker. And I tell you, you can put a price point on rods. Once you start getting up into two-handed rods that are about $700 or more, that's where they really start to change in terms of the feel.
Oh, they do.
Absolutely.
So the feel gets more, like you said, it's not a stiff whatever. You get more of the soul.
Exactly right. And they're lighter in hand, and a light rod means less mass, which now interprets, I feel every head shake the fish has to offer during the fight, which brings me back to it. I love the, fish fight as well.
Yep.
And again, just in terms of overall ease of casting, at the same time, I don't want to say a statement, oh, you got to spend that much money to get into this. No, there are some really good rods from $300 to $500 that you can fish for years on end and be very happy with. It just, kind of depends what you're looking for. But here's one thing I do hear from my clients all the time. Jeff, I'm so new to this, I won't be able to feel it. I completely disagree with that. And every time I put a rod in somebody's hand, they go, oh, okay, I get it now, right?
Yeah.
So the light bulb pops on. And when they say, during a lesson, I feel this, that for me is the magic word right there. Because if you can feel this, now your skills are going to increase tremendously in a much shorter period of time.
Definitely. Yeah, you can feel it. Yeah, that's a big part of, we've talked quite a bit about with the single hand rods. We've had some casting instructors that have talked about the nuclear arms race up to faster and faster and faster. And the fact that sometimes if you don't get it right, you don't feel right. That's the key, especially if you're new to fly casting. You can't, if you don't feel it, that's not a good thing, right? Absolutely.
Absolutely. And the manufacturers have sped up the rods because they're more forgiving, right? The more a rod bends, the more you're going to see of the negative things that are occurring in your cast. And I actually like that. I tell my clients, that's feedback for you. Well, Jeff, I'm throwing tailing loops every other cast. Okay, so let's work on your acceleration. Let's work on why that tailing loop is being formed. And then as soon as we address that, oh, you're right, Jeff, I can feel this. So yeah, I do love rods that have soul to them. Some of the Winston rods too, they fall in that same category. There's a lot of feel to them. So, and I'm not specific on one manufacturer. It's just when you purchase a rod, please cast the rod before you make the purchase.
Yeah.
Right. Don't do this online unless you've already cast it, or maybe you cast your friend's rod on a fishing trip. Put it in your hands. Don't trust what is being sold to you without actually feeling it first.
Perfect. So, and Bob Miser, that's interesting because I think he's transitioned out, right? Did he sell the company? And so, but your rods are made by one of his engineers, essentially.
Exactly right. Absolutely. Yeah. Nick Moses and his brother Trent have moved the business over to Bend, and they're doing a phenomenal job. Nick Moses is one of the best rod builders currently in the United States because he's been taught by some of the legends in this area.
Yeah. So is Miser Rod still out there going, and is who's running that, or is that Nick running that as well?
Nick Moses is running the Miser Rods.
Oh yeah. That's Nick. Okay, so we've connected. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I think I've chatted with Nick somewhere along the line. So that's perfect.
Okay.
So good stuff. All right. So we got the rod, we got the line. Maybe let's take it back to a little bit on the steelhead. So we're out there fish for steelhead. What are you, again, this is trying to get people a little bit lift up, say they don't have a chance to do the school. What are some other things they should be thinking about if they've got some heavy stuff they're throwing and they want to improve their cast? Maybe they've got some struggles.
Absolutely. Keep your heads short. So using a Skagit head is going to make it a lot easier to learn the entire spey casting method. Stay away from super fast, heavy sink tips at first, because that changes your timing. So maybe start off with an intermediate or something that sinks less than 6 inches per second. That also makes a big difference. Casting sometimes with a shorter rod. Some people are under the impression they'll come to me brand new and they'll go, hey, I bought this 14-foot 8-weight,
Right.
Jeff, and I'm going to be fishing here on the Rogue. And I'm going, oh boy, that's a way too big of a rod. Well, so-and-so told me that the longer the rod, the easier it is to cast. Not so true.
Not
Right?
true. So that's another myth. So why is the longer rod not better than the shorter?
Because the longer rod makes it easier to blow the anchor and pull it off the water.
Oh, right. Which is what I was doing that day when we were using those 14-foot 9 and 10 weights.
There you go. Very common, right? Very common.
Right.
With that long of a rod, your casting stroke needs to slow way down. And if somebody's brand new to it, they pick up a two-handed rod and instantly their brain goes to muscle, power, and get it out there quick, right? It's the absolute opposite with those longer Spey rods.
Right. So you got to slow everything down even more.
Absolutely.
Typically. Gotcha. Okay. So those are awesome. And then what about the integrated fly lines where you've got kind of floating, sink or intermediate sinking, right? The fist is one that's out there.
Yeah.
Are those lines that you recommend? Are those good lines to be using?
How
would you pick how do you select your line for steelhead?
You bet. So they have the different density heads now that are very popular. Different, and I'm gonna step back from that. Besides those, the number one system to set up with, it would be a floating running line of the appropriate diameter. Okay, there's different diameters, and they're all relative to the rod weight that you're using.
Oh, they are. So the running line, so you have the mono and the other. So you want to get one that's actually the diameter is correct to the setup you're using.
That is correct. If I'm using, we'll just make it real simple. If I'm using, let's say, a 6-weight, I want the diameter to be around 32 thousandths.
Okay.
When I get up to my 8-weight, I want to get that up to maybe 38 thousandths, maybe even 40 thousandths for the 8s and 9s. And if I'm using the trout Spey, I want to get that down into about maybe 22 to 25 thousandths. And the thinner the diameter, the less resistance going through the guides. But think about it, when you're using an 8-weight or 9-weight, you've got a Skagit head that's close to 600 grains, and you're stripping that in. And if it's cold outside, you want something to be able to grab onto.
Yeah.
So larger diameter running line is important. And they all should be floating because you're going to be storing those loops of fly line at your feet or on the water surface. And if it sinks, it doesn't want to come back out and shoot through the guides. So a floating running line by far is the most important. The appropriate grain weight of Skagit head and the balanced tip that must go on the end of the Skagit head, so important. So we'll just say that if you have a Skagit head that is 450 grains or less, you can use T8, okay, which is tungsten, 8 grains per foot. That works really well on 450 grain heads or less. If you go from 450 to 525, you're looking for 11 grains per foot in your head. So that would be a Mo medium. Okay. And then once you get up to over 550 grains to about 625, now you're using T14. Okay, so Mo tips come in T14. And then if you're going beyond 650 grains, then you want to use the extra heavy Mo, which is T17. Okay, what a lot of people will assume, they'll go, hey, Jeff, T17 sinks at, 9 inches per second. Boy, that sinks a lot faster than T8 does at 6 inches per second. I'm going to throw that on. No, you won't.
No, okay.
If it's not balanced, it won't work. It is the head itself that is responsible for lifting that heavy tip up off the water. So a lot of people think, oh, if I put that T8 on there too, I'm going to get more load in my rod. No, you're not. It's the head that lifts the tip up off the water.
It's the head, not
right?
the tip.
So it's all about the size of the head based upon the rod. And then if you really back out of the whole equation, Dave, and you look at it, it really boils down to the fly size. It's the fly size. And then what's based upon the fly size? How does that work? Oh, that's based upon the conditions we're fishing in.
Yeah.
So if I go up to BC and I fish the Copper River and the water's low and clear, my fly's not going to be that big. So therefore I wouldn't want to throw a 600 grain Skagit head, right? That where I'd have to throw T14 tips. That's too much splashdown on the presentation.
Yeah.
So I might have to back off on that, go to my 7 weight, put a Scandi head on and run just a long monofilament leader or a Versa leader or a poly leader that's balanced to that head size. And one thing also on my website is under my fly shop, if you go to Spey Zone, the first document I put up there on Spey Zone is adding tips or leader to a Spey line. So this can get very confusing, but on this one page, I basically have made it very easy to balance the heads and the tips and the leaders that go on all these different lines.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I see it. This is great. Yeah, we'll have a link to that page as well so people can take a look. Yeah, that's
Super.
awesome. So that's it. So depending on what you start with the conditions, and then you choose the fly, and then you go up from there. So yeah, if you're using a giant fly, you're probably not going to be using a T8, or it won't be as effective, or it won't be as easy.
Yeah, well said. And it's almost impossible to cast some of the big flies that you throw, let's say on the lower skeena. Some of those are 4 to 5, 6 inches in length.
Yeah.
T8 and T11 will not turn those over,
Yeah.
right? So you have to go to T14 to get that done. So.
Yeah, good. Okay, cool. Well, let's take it out of here shortly. And this is we mentioned a couple times, our Wet Fly Swing Pro member community segment. We've got a group in there of amazing people that are traveling and kind of just learning from each other. And today, this is presented by Patagonia. We were up there using their Swift Current waders, and a big shout out to Patagonia because they're an awesome company doing great stuff. So in today's shout out, first off, I want to mention Justin. So he was out there when we were at the Togiak. We were on the dock. It was pretty sweet. There was this giant dock which had a run right out in front from the lodge, and everybody was sitting there. I never went out there because I'm kind of scared about that. Not quite at the level, but Justin had this beautiful cast, and he was just sitting there doing both sides and everything, and it was just cool to watch. So I want to give Justin a big shout out because that was fun. That was a fun week having him up there and all that. But talk about that. First off, we're going to get a few more tips out of you, but should we be learning to cast as well with top hand, your left or right hand as the top hand? What's your advice there?
Well said. Myself, because when I did my certification in 2003, I became the fifth person to be certified for two-handed Spey casting by it was the FFF, which is now FFI.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I went through that, I made a kind of a promise to myself that I want to be able to teach both left-handed casters and right-handed casters. So I actually went through that test and learned how to cast left hand for the test. Now, put me in fishing situations, I'm very glad that I did because either side of my body, I feel very comfortable. The downside to not casting with both hands, if you just cast with your right hand and you bring the rod across your body, we call that the cack-handed or reverse casting. If you do that, for the most part, it's going to get you the distance you need. But if you were to switch hands, let's say if you're a right-handed caster dominant and you switched over to your left, you're going to find out when you cast with both hands separately that you actually increase the length of movement. Your stroke length can get longer because it's not, your body is not interfering with your top right hand against your shoulder. So now imagine if I switch to my left, I can bring my left arm and hand much further back. So for me, that's important. But reality is most of us, we're catching fish under about 70 feet away. So if you're fishing the small streams and stuff, hey, no problem. Just cast in reverse. It's not a big deal. I will say teaching people, it's kind of fascinating that I say to them, have you ever tried this with your opposite hand? And they go, oh, no, I have, no dexterity, no muscle memory. And I'm going, good, because now you have no bad habits. So let's try that out. And most people are very surprised how well they cast with their opposite hand with two-handed rods.
There you go. So it's something that, you should probably, it's something if you're going to do it for your life, probably be good to learn and just have that in your toolbox.
Absolutely. And in reality, it comes down to you're going to have to cast off both sides because you're going to have wind. The wind
Yeah.
is our big issue. So if you have a downstream wind and you're on river left, you do not want that anchor point and D-loop on your upstream side. So reverse is a necessity in some fishing situations.
Yeah, good. Okay. And you said, so you were the first person certified for two-handed casting with the FFF?
Yes, there was actually 5 people in front of me, but they all were grandfathered in through the program.
Oh,
So
wow.
I took my, I think it was 2003, by the 5 gentlemen. Simon Gosworth was one of them. Let's see, Steve Choate was in that group as well. Al Burr, they'd all done their certification. Basically, I was the first person to go through the test, and the test took me over 5.5 hours because I kept questioning the process of the test.
Oh, really? Because it was brand new.
They were brand new. And they said, hey, man, we love your feedback here. This is exactly what we need to know of how to conduct this test in the future. So it worked out good. We all learned a bunch of stuff. And Simon was nice enough to share his scotch with me during the test. And I had to say, hey, Simon, I gotta pass this thing, man.
Right.
No more scotch.
Yeah.
But it was a really good eye-opening lesson for me in terms of how testing works, but also how we're going to be teaching our students in the future. Right. That was a really wonderful thing for me to go through. So I passed that. When I was up there, everybody's saying, Jeff, this has got like almost a 90% failure rate. How are you going to get this done? Are you going to be able to do this? And for me, this is my life. Right. Yeah. I was doing this every single day, teaching people. And so for me, I went into it a little different because I knew this is my profession. And I've been teaching so much. It was kind of funny. The FFI called me up probably, let's say, 15 years after I went through that program. They called me up and said, hey, our instructors need help to pass the certification test. We would like to hire you and send the instructors so you can get them to pass the test so they can be certified. So that worked out really well. Wow. Right. And I worked with them and even learned more about the process of, really testing. And it's funny how different it is from teaching a fly fisherman, to go out and teach that person casting versus teaching an instructor.
Right.
Night and day difference, two different things. It was fascinating. And what I learned from it was invaluable.
Wow. That's awesome. Yeah, this is great. So you're there. So now obviously FFI is going strong. Do they have still, is the two-handed instruction, do you stay on that? Is that still a big part of what they do?
They do. Absolutely. And Dave, I actually stopped my certification probably about 10 years ago. I'm not certified by them anymore. And
so you have to keep it. So you have to keep the certification or how does that work?
You basically have to pay a yearly fee. To do this, right? So I'm looking back over paying this yearly fee over 20-something years, and I'm going, how many people actually hired me based upon my certification? Probably about 3 people knew about it and then came out and did that. So I let my certification go, but the program has gotten even better where now instead of just one two-handed certification, they have the basic and they have a master's certification. So they're really driving and pushing the bar further, which I absolutely love to hear. I want to recommend other casters, teachers around the world. If somebody says, hey, Jeff, I'm in such and such place, I can't get to see you. Who do you recommend? Usually if they've gone through the FFI and they're certified, especially in two-handed, they're pretty good instructors because they've raised the bar so much.
So that's it. So it is good for people if they really want to get serious about this and to take that. And it's not, I've heard some people probably take it that aren't even instructors just because they want to get to that next level. But do you think it's mostly instructors that are taking those?
Yeah, I think it's mostly instructors that are, but you're right. There's a lot of retired people that I know say, hey, you know what? I just want to get better at this. And what you're going to get better at is you're going to get better at explaining what you're doing. Right? Because when you bring somebody new into this, the last thing they want to hear is all this crazy terminology that they're not going to remember after an hour to 2 hours of doing this. Yeah. So being an instructor certified, you have the ability to very clearly state what you're trying to the point you're trying to get across with as few words as you possibly can use. That's the strong point to that.
Yeah, that's big. Okay. And as we take it out of here, I want to hear about, we have this casting challenge coming, which is really exciting. If you were to have an exercise or two that you could tell people now that hey, go do this exercise, whether it's on the grass or maybe you have to be on the water. What do you have a couple exercises people could work on? What would that be for Spey?
Okay, for Spey casting. So being able to work on the switch cast, right?
Yeah.
Going back to the switch cast because that breaks everything down. Working on the switch cast and try to actually do this in non-moving water that's approximately waist deep. And the reason why I say that is if you go to the Spey-orama every year, that's about I think the third Saturday of April every year at the Golden Gate Casting Ponds in San Francisco. They've got this incredible event. There's so much history out there too. It's kind of where, fly fishing got started on the West Coast. Yeah. But you'll see some of the best Spey casters from around the world. And these guys are in non-moving water, waist deep. And you can really break the cast down, but what they possess by being able to cast on non-moving water, they understand tension and acceleration like nobody else. And the tension that you start with, low rod tip, and think about it, you don't have the current pulling the line tight, right? So when you start lifting up and your rod's 1 inch from the surface of the water, you're connected with the tension. You become one of the smoothest casters you possibly can be.
Oh, that's cool.
So yeah, I always look at that as one of the most important teaching tools for Spey casting, especially for the casting contests.
Yep.
And be prepared to change directions. And I say that you might do, let's say, a single Spey. You might have to change 45 degrees. Well, when you're trying to knock one out of the park, you're generating so much power and so much speed as you set your D-loop and anchor point up that sometimes that D-loop and anchor point want to kick out too far away from you, meaning it's more than maybe a rod and a half length away from you. Once your D-loops and anchor points get out that far, you start to really lose the load. Okay, so being able to change direction and keeping that anchor point tight, close to you is one of the most important things you can do to generate the tension and power to make that forward cast to give you the ultimate distance that you're trying for.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, so those are two things we could work on for sure. The tension, acceleration, then changing the direction and keeping your anchor point close to you, not getting too wide.
Absolutely.
Wow, this is awesome. Nice, Jeff. Well, I think we could probably leave it there today. I think this gives us some stuff to work on. And like we said, you got a bunch of resources on your website at jpflyfishing.com, and they can check in with you. This has been really great. Hopefully we'll be in touch, again, moving ahead. Maybe we'll connect on some school stuff down the line. But any other words of advice as we get out of here? Do you feel like we've covered enough to get people a start here?
Yeah, I think we've given enough information to not scare too many people away. and the ultimate thing is once you get your equipment, get out on the water. That's where we're going to have the fun, right? It's all about being on the water, enjoying nature in its true form. That's the real reward for doing this. If you get your equipment and you're not catching fish, it doesn't matter. You're going to still have a really good time practicing your casting in one of the most beautiful environments you can be in.
Perfect. All right, Jeff, we'll be in touch. Thanks again for all your time.
Thank you very much, Dave. I appreciate you.
You can check out more with Jeff. You can find videos, recommendations for lines, everything we talked about today on his website, including the 4-step casting breakdown, jpflyfishing.com. You can also check him out on YouTube. If you get a chance, let him know on social you heard this podcast and let him know you checked in. If you're interested, Wet Fly Swing Pro, this is our place where we're connecting with people like Jeff and others. We're sharing stories, we're building trips, we're doing it all. Wet Fly Swing Pro. We're going to be opening this up really quickly. You can go to wetflyswing.com/pro, leave your name and email, and we'll follow up with you when the doors open again. For Wet Fly Swing Pro, this is our community. If you're interested, if you want to take everything to the next level, this is your best way. One shout out to the Steelhead School. We've got some good stuff going if you want to get involved in that. We got Jeff Liskay and Brian Niska are running that. So check in with me. And we also have a couple of big podcasts, In the Bucket and The Great Lakes Dude is coming up next week. All right, deep breath. Deep breath. That was a lot. And now we can relax and get on to the next thing you got going today. So I'm excited to get on to my next thing. Hope you're having a good day. Hope you have a great morning. Hope you're having an amazing afternoon. If it's evening, if it's late in the evening, or if it's early, I hope you're enjoying it. And we look forward to seeing you and talking to you on that next episode. We'll talk to you then.